Hey guys, thanks for joining me today. For the supply list, go ahead and check the description box below. It'll have a list of all the materials I used for this painting. So for today, I'm going to teach you how to do a pet portrait or how to paint animals in general. This is a 9 by 12 inch gesso board, and I've coated it with 2 coats of blue-gray from Liquitex. And then I went in and traced on my image, and you'll see at this beginning layer that I pretty much go through the entire dog and just lay down a loose interpretation of hair strokes, really just kind of establishing my values. I do use a larger brush. For these tiny areas, I am using a small round brush, but for the hair textured areas, I didn't want to get too detailed in the beginning. So I went ahead and used a larger filbert brush for the rest of it. And really all of this is just establishing values and being really loose with my brush strokes so that it creates kind of a natural hair pattern, nothing too structured. And this reference photo was from Unsplash, and I'll have a link for that in the description box below. And then if you would like the traceable for this, you can head on over to Facebook and join Boz Art Tutorials Facebook group. And from now on, I'll have the traceables available for each video I upload. They will be available there. If you don't have Facebook, go ahead and send me an email to the email in the description box below, and I can go ahead and email it to you. It's really helpful when you're doing pet portraits to have a good solid sketch down first, and if you're not very comfortable with your drawing abilities at this point, then it's best just to start with a traceable and get some guidelines down, and then go ahead and start painting from there. So again, I'm just establishing all of my values and changing the tones a little bit in the different areas. I did want, on the reference, I did change the reference photo just a little bit. The lightest area, the highest value of the highlights was more of a cool white, and I changed that to a warm light. And so you'll see I'll start highlighting, but it looks like I'm using pure white. However, I'm using unbleached titanium with a little bit of white in there to keep it nice and warm. And then changed my shadow areas from, in the reference photo, was actually very warm, and I wanted that cool and warm contrast. So I changed the shadow areas to a nice cool color, keeping it more on the blue tones. So here you can see the white on my palette. The camera picks up just as pure white, but it is unbleached titanium with a little bit of titanium white mixed in. And this, as you can see, as I'm painting this, I'm just being very loose with it. I'm allowing a lot of brush strokes to show because those give you some nice fur detail without actually having to paint each fur stroke and strand. So on this layer, I do leave it very loose. And here is more of a mid-tone color. Just wanted something a little bit warmer in this area. It is kind of light, but more grayed out, less saturation in this area. And I highly suggest when you're painting to go ahead and print out your reference photo to the size of your canvas. That makes it really easy to see where things might be off. It really allows you to, sometimes when you're on a tablet or a phone, you can zoom in a little bit too much, so your eye picks up way too much detail than what is really needed for that size of a canvas. So if it's possible, I do suggest printing it out to the size canvas that you're painting it on. Especially if you're a beginner, it just seems to help. And you can see I'm constantly adjusting values. So I'll put dark in one area and light in another. And then if I look around the painting and realize that those values are off, then I'm going to go in and readjust those. So I do jump around a little bit. It's good to kind of build the painting up all at once. It creates a more uniformed look. Some painters do like to work on sections at a time. I am not one of those painters. I like to kind of build it up as I go and work in layers all together. That way everything is kind of a perfect harmony with each other. I'm not worried about this color not matching that area. It just tends to go a little faster for me. And you can see that brush I'm using is actually it's a pretty big brush for some of the smaller areas, but I wanted to use the largest brush that I could, at least that I could get away with without messing up too much detail and losing my sketch. That way I wasn't tightening up too much. And you can see when I'm putting on this first layer, I'm just being kind of sketcherly with it, wiggling my brush a lot. I don't do really broad brush strokes because I want that texture. It's going to show through even when I go through with the second layer. A lot of that shows through. The second layer is basically just adding more detail, the cleaning up some of the edges and adding a little bit finer detail. But a lot of the original painting, the base layer shows through. So definitely when you're painting any kind of animal that has hair or fur, you want to go ahead and look at your reference photo and follow the direction that the hair naturally grows. I wouldn't want to go into an area and paint a completely different direction than what the hair naturally grows, because like I said, I'm not repainting the entire painting with the second layer. So I want to make sure that any that is showing after I do the second layer looks like it's just the hair texture. It looks like it doesn't need to be done. It'll save you a lot of time instead of just blocking everything in a solid color, going in this way and putting in little patches of color with the directional brush strokes. That's going to save you a lot of time for this next layer. A lot of artists, they make a living off of doing pet portraits, and when I began painting, that was primarily what I painted, was pet portraits, and I still love it. I still get commissions for it all the time. But if you are wanting to make money from your art, that is an excellent way. If you can learn how to paint from a photo that a client can give you of their animal, that is an excellent way to make a living. People love their animals. They love them represented in an artistic way. There's an emotional connection with it. But you really do have to compete with a lot of other pet portrait artists out there. So you do need to try to find your style, what kind of sets you apart from others. But I do suggest, even if you don't want to paint pet portraits, just painting animals in general. If you're a landscape artist and what you prefer is landscapes, painting pet portraits will help you add life to your landscape painting. So you'll be more comfortable putting in a cow or a sheep or a horse or whatever, a bear, whatever wild animal you can think of into your painting. A lot of paintings, like landscape paintings, even having birds and things like that, those add life to the painting. They make it more believable to the viewer. So even though you may not want to be a pet portrait artist, learning how to paint them will help you in whichever aspect of painting you want to do. You can see on this painting that now you can really see how the shadowed areas are a lot cooler than where the highlight areas are. And it gives it a really nice contrast. And in the reference photo, I did change the background It was more of a white background, but it competed a little bit too much with the highlighted areas, the really bright highlights on top of the bulldog. So I went ahead with just kind of a basic blue-gray color, and that way I could really get the oomph and the contrast that I wanted out of those really bright highlights. And I'm still at the stage where I'm being completely loose with it. I'll get the entire painting blocked in loosely, and then I go back through and really tighten everything up. And when I am painting animal portraits, I like to start with the eye and kind of work my way out from there. And that way I'm not concerned with losing my sketch, or, I want it to replicate the animal in real life. So losing your sketch, especially if you're not a comfortable drawer, if you're not comfortable at drawing, then losing your sketch could be crucial. So just to make my life easier, I like to just start with the eye and work my way out to the nose and the mouth. The main facial features, I like to start with those. And I'm laying this color in right now, but I don't have my darkest value in, which is the shadow underneath the couch that the dog is laying on. So you'll see that I have to readjust that quite a bit, because once I put that dark black shadow underneath the couch, everything else is extremely light. So that's why it's important to always just adjust your values as you go. Make sure that you're reassessing everything. Is this area light enough compared to this other area? You really just want to, it's a constant reassessing. So I'm going to be doing a glazing technique on this, the wood part of the couch here, and you'll see it in a minute. I'm just laying in some, I think that's burnt umber that I'm using, and I'm just laying that in as a base for that. And blocking in loosely some of the darker areas, the shadows. And I end up doing 2 coats on the shadow area down here. So right now it looks, the value is a lot lighter. Once I go through with the second coat, then you'll really be able to see that, that it's really much, much more saturated and darker. For this area here, I just wanted to make sure I had a soft transition from the back wall color to the floor. So I really just used a dry brushing technique where it doesn't have any water on the brush, and I just gently brush over that to merge those colors a little bit. So here's where I'm doing the second coat, and you can see the value change and how it makes the couch look lighter and the dog look much lighter. And that's because my values aren't where they need to be in the shadow areas on the dog and the couch yet. So here I'm using a flat brush to create this wood texture that I see. And this is, I'm gonna glaze over this with the burnt umber and a water mixture, but I couldn't get the saturation that I was looking for, because in order to get the value that I needed, I had to add white. And once you add white to a color, it's going to automatically desaturate it. So right now I'm just working with these 2 colors, and I'm creating the highlight area of the lighter pieces of wood grain and some of the darker areas that I see. And then I'm going over with just a mixture of burnt umber and a lot of water, and I'm glazing over that. And because I did the 2 different values with that light tan color, even when I glaze over it, you're gonna see that some areas they look like they're highlighted more than other areas. But doing the glaze allows me to get the saturation of the wood color that I need. So here I am, I'm adjusting my values again in the shadow areas, and you can see once I start adding in this dark color what I was talking about, and how those areas, the shadow areas really needed to be much darker to kind of give it that wow factor and really amplify the painting. And the darker that your values are, the wider range, the more wow factor you're going to have, the more contrast that you have, they're going to do exactly that. They're going to contrast each other. So it really kind of wows the viewer, like, wow, there's a bright light source coming in. It makes it more obvious and more appealing as a painting. So this is starting the second layer. I start back at the eye again. I'm not covering up everything I painted before. Right now I'm just adding little touches of color that need a little bit more saturation. Not necessarily a glazing technique, but I am using very little paint on this layer and just adding in all those details that I see. And these aren't the very final details. I will pull out the liner brush and pick out a few areas that I want to add a little bit more detail, finer strokes with, but that's at the very end. And because I changed the where the light source was a warmer white and the shadows were a cooler dark, the blue background actually benefited me quite a bit, because any areas that I did miss in the shadow areas, you really couldn't tell. If I didn't get the canvas completely covered, it actually complemented in some areas, having that background color show through a little bit. If you guys have any questions on painting your own pet portrait, or any questions in general about painting that you would like to ask me, you can head on over to the Facebook group Boz Art Tutorials, and that's kind of where we'll discuss a little bit more about if you're having an issue with a particular painting and need some advice, or another set of eyes, or you're doing a tutorial of mine and have a question. I'm more likely to answer there than YouTube. Sometimes YouTube doesn't notify me of comments. So if you don't have Facebook, however, go ahead and put it in the comments below, and I do try to check it frequently. So for this this painting, like this second layer that I'm doing here, this is where my edging, this is where I'm getting some of those hairs that might stick out. That's this layer right here is where I'm able to put those as they cross over some of the shadow areas. Adding a little bit of fur texture over it really brings out the realistic factor in the painting. If I left those very hard edges a little bit too clean, it wouldn't look as natural. I want to make sure that on some of the transition areas from the light to the shadow areas, I have a little bit more vibrancy. If you notice in real life, there is this natural vibrancy that kind of happens between a highlight area and a shadow area. So I'm going to have that area be a little bit more saturated. So on his ear, you can kind of see how the top is really a bright, warm white, and then it becomes more saturated and vibrant before it hits the dark area or the shadow area. That's one little tip that will bring a little bit more realism to your paintings, is those slight little variations that you see. And really anytime that you paint realism, and this isn't even considered hyper realistic or anything like that, those are way more in depth and I don't have the patience for those, but I do like realistic paintings, just that if you were to get up very close to the painting, you'll see that it's actually a painting. I like those kind of paintings and tend to paint more in that style. But if you are going for any kind of realism, whether it's hyper realistic or just similar to what I'm doing, you want to make sure that that reference photo that you're using is very clear and it shows the different hair strokes, where they kind of grow out of and which direction they're coming out of. You want all of those details to be clear, because the more information that you have in your reference photo, the better the painting is going to turn out. When your mind has to make up those details, it's not going to be accurate. And when the viewer sees it, they're going to see that something is off, because your mind is trying to make up those details. Even if you've painted an animal 1,000 different times, you're not going to remember, or this particular pose, you're not going to remember which direction maybe the hair is laying in that area. And if it's a large area, the viewer's going to notice that something just seems off. They may not know what it is, but they'll notice that something seems off. And sometimes it is just as simple as the wrong, hair stroke right there. So keeping that in mind, a good solid reference is the biggest advantage that you can have if you're trying to paint realism. And if you do pet portrait tutorials or pet portraits, if you take on commissions for those, that's something that you're going to run into, is that generally most people, they're not photographers, but they want their pet painted. So the other option to that is you can go photograph the animal yourself. You can coordinate with a local photographer for that. Or I've done some that didn't have very good reference photos at all. And I have to tell the client that, yes, I can do this, but it's not going to have as much detail as a high quality photo would. So just keep that in mind. A good reference is a necessity if you're going for any kind of realism. If you guys have any questions on this painting, like I said, join the Facebook group Boz Art Tutorials, or leave a comment down below in the comment section and I'd be happy to answer that for you. If you want the traceable, you can find those over on Boz Art Tutorials Facebook group, or send me an email. In the description box below we'll have my email and a link to all my social media sites. You can send me an email for the traceable and I can send that out to you. So this final bit is just adjusting all of my values to exactly where I want them. And then you'll see I'm tightening up everything, making sure that I don't have any stray lines that I'm not happy with, reshaping a little bit here and there. But you'll see I'll bring out the liner brush and start doing some of the whisker detail. And with a liner brush, you want to, the key to those is to make sure that your paint mixture, your paint and water mixture, is a similar consistency to ink or even milk sometimes. You don't want it any more watery than that, and you don't want it any less. You want it to come off the brush and become nice and fluid and thin, but you want the opacity. So keeping that kind of milk or ink consistency is your best bet for that. So this is where I just do all of those little tiny details. I really don't do a ton. I just want to make it believable and realistic. I'm not looking to paint every single hair with the liner brush, so I just want to add details that it is there. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and we will see you next week. Thanks.